Welcome to the Hockey Writers Fantasy Forecheck, where we talk to you about all things fantasy, keeper league, redraft, and dynasty. We're going to give you hot players to pick up, prospects on the rise, sleepers you should or shouldn't think of acquiring, and prospects who are looking to break out at the NHL level. This week, we will be discussing the topic, what to do about goalies. I'm your host, Caleb Kerney.
And I am Jake Strozyk.
Jacob, we missed you last week. How's it going?
Oh, I'm living the dream. It was nice having that all-star break, but those strange all-star events were somewhat entertaining, but otherwise weird. So, it was nice to have a little bit of a fantasy break and kind of just relax and not have the stress of it. So I can't complain too much.
Yeah, I mean, for my big dynasty league that I love and adore, that I've been a part of for years, this past week has been an extension of the previous week. So we've had a 2-week matchup, which is probably what most leagues are doing. And, getting into the final day, I'm poised to win my matchup, but let's see what happens with the rest of it. But this week, in keeping, we're going to keep every segment goalie focused to give the listeners and viewers as much information to work with as possible so you can win your fantasy leagues by listening to us. Jacob, why don't you kick things off and start us with some hot goalies?
Yeah, so first one we're going to talk about, probably one of the hottest goalies in the NHL right now, Edmonton Oilers goalie Jack Campbell. This guy is just on an absolute heater right now. 8-game win streak since January 11th. He only has one loss since January 1st. He is just playing lights out. He got pulled once, and that was he got pulled once against the LA Kings, and that was on January 9th. And since then, he just has gone on an absolute tear for the Oilers. And that means absolutely everything for that team. But as far as fantasy goes, when you have a hot goalie, you ride that hot goalie. And everybody who started the year thinking, oh, Jack Campbell, he's playing for Edmonton, this is going to be his, breakout year. Everything's going to be awesome. He was great for Toronto last year. And then everybody was let down. He was getting dropped left and right. He was easily one of the coldest goalies you could possibly have. Right now, he's one of the best ones you can have. So if you held on to him, you have an absolute winner. And if he's sitting on your waiver wire, you should absolutely grab him if he hasn't already been scooped up.
Yeah, I mean, like Campbell, yeah, he's definitely on a hot streak right now, for sure. In his last 9 games played, which I believe has been 9 wins, 4 of those games have been quality starts, and a quality start is just a game where a goaltender has above the league average save percentage for that game. So he's had 10 quality starts this entire season, and 4 of those have come in the last 9 games. So he's definitely really picking up steam. He's played 27 games played. He's also had 6 really bad starts, which is a sub 850 save percentage for a game. And, on the season, he is like, his numbers still don't totally look good across the entire season. But this kind of happens with Campbell. Like last year, it was sort of the reverse. He started really hot, and then he started to cool off as the quarters of the season sort of progressed. And now it's the complete reverse. His first quarter of the season, he had like a 4 goals against average, like an 8-something save percentage, just not great numbers at all. And he's slowly building it up and going on a heater. Towards the end of the season is the exact right time. You want your goalie to be running so that they're lights out for the playoffs. And there's another team with several goalies. We're going to talk about one next. Their goalie situation is interesting, and this is one of 3 goalies that have seen a lot of games. So, Jacob, why don't you tell us about the next one?
Yeah, next one is Carolina Hurricanes goalie Antti Raanta. He is a backup goaltender through and through, and it's always great to have those types of goalies on your roster, especially if they put up good numbers. This guy has one loss since December 17th, and that was an overtime loss. So he wins games and he plays on a really good team. He's just an overall good backup goaltender. He has 2 shutouts on the year, so that's even better as far as just fantasy coverage, whether you do categories or whether you do points. Shutouts are always a bonus in every league that you are in. So the fact that he has 2 as a backup is just monumental for him. And while Carolina has the 3 good goaltenders to run through, there's always a good, if you have a deeper league, he's the kind of goaltender you can have on your bench and play him when you see that he's playing and feel confident that you're going to get a win out of him.
Absolutely, for sure. And that, I'll talk a little bit about Carolina's goaltending situation in a later segment with one of my players, but there's a lot of different things going on with Carolina, and Anderson has been injured most of the year. So Ranta is definitely a solid pickup. And some other players that you should think about picking up are these prospects on the rise. These goaltenders I'm talking about today. The first one, Devin Levi. He's a 6 foot, 185-pound goaltender. He's playing NCAA, playing for Northeastern University, part of the Buffalo system. Jacob, you may have heard of him. Presently unsigned. He was originally a 2020 7th round Florida Panthers pick. So he's doing really well for a 7th rounder. If you can get anything that resembles an NHL or AHL player with a 7th rounder, that's a win in my books. This year, 27 games played, 2.34 goals against average, .930 save percentage, 4 shutouts, and a record of 14-9-4. This guy is having a solid year. It's not quite as lights out as last year, which, for those who don't know, 32 games played, 1.54 goals against average, .952 save percentage, 10 shutouts, 21-10-1. So this guy, he's with Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, trying to get sort of the starter's job in Buffalo. The Buffalo goaltending situation is obviously strange right now with different sort of placeholders while these prospects cook and get to a performance level that will allow them to be NHL caliber. Levi's a great guy to pick up in your leagues. Jacob, what do you think about Mr. Levi here?
Yeah, Levi is absolutely just seen as the Sabres goalie of the future. The goaltending situation in Buffalo is absolutely weird, having the 3 rotational goalies, but it really is, you said it absolutely right. They really are just placeholders as they wait for the younger players to develop. And that doesn't mean that Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, or UPL as just about everybody calls him, won't take over that starting position. But Levi has all of the right tools to take over that spot. Maybe not this year, or definitely not this year, maybe not next year, but within, I would say, 2 to 3 years, he's the type of goaltender that has all of the right fit. He's quick. He is a little shorter for a goaltender, but he has the quickness and the reaction speed to make up for the fact that he is shorter. Think somebody like UC Saros and the way that he plays. It's easily the best comparison, and he's just a fun goalie to watch. I got to watch him back at the development camp that the Sabres had over the summer, and my gosh, this kid is just something else. And if you ever get a chance to watch some Northeastern highlights, I highly recommend it, because he's just absolutely ridiculous. That team is not anything spectacular comparative to last year, and he's still the one making sure that they win games.
There you go. Another goalie who's winning games, Dustin Wolf of the in the Calgary system. He was 2019, another 7th round pick, 214th overall. Another 6 foot goalie, 174 pounds. Playing for the Calgary Wranglers this year. 35 games played, 2.15 goals against average, .930 save percentage, 4 shutouts, and a record of 27-6-1. This guy has kind of been labeled, Calgary's goalie of the future. And yeah, that's, another goaltending situation that's kind of weird. Markstrom hasn't quite been performing to the level that people were kind of expecting of him. And Vladar's been taking a lot of starts from him. Do we see Wolf get called up soon, Jacob?
You could see Wolf get called up. The Calgary situation is just a bit unfortunate. Markstrom just hasn't been up to the caliber that he was last year. Vladar is a good, solid goaltender, and he's still young. He's got plenty of time to keep developing and maybe turning into a starting goaltender. But Wolf absolutely is their goaltender of the future. He has all, again, similar to Levi, he has just all the right tools. He's quick. He's got the right mindset. He's great positionally. And he's just absolutely lighting up the AHL in a way that most goaltenders don't do so early on in their career. So he's poised to take over that Calgary net, I would say, within the next 1 to 2 years even.
There you go. He's looking real good. Some goalies who not really looking so good lately. Jacob, why don't you tell us about these two goalies that you got here for your cold streaks?
Yeah, cold goaltenders. Goalies in general are always streaky, and one of the streakiest ones in the history of the NHL, in my opinion, we got Martin Jones, and that's from the Seattle Kraken. He has 3 straight losses currently, and in those 3 straight losses, 2 times he had 4 goals against, and the 1 time he had 5 goals against. That's the Martin Jones that shows up when he is cold. And he's just always been notoriously streaky. When he's hot, he's on, but the numbers aren't spectacular. He's not the throw up a 956 save percentage and a sub 2 goals against. He's wins games with a 3.0 goals against and a 890 save percentage. That's just the type of goaltender he's always been. So if you're looking for category coverage out of him, you're never really going to get it. And if you have Martin Jones, if he's hot, play him. If he's cold, sit him, because when he's cold, he's very cold. And now is the time when he's cooling off. So I would definitely say he's a man to just sit right on your bench until either he heats up or until Seattle heats up, because it's pretty much hand in hand as far as that goes.
Yeah, past like 4 or 5 years, Martin Jones, it seemed he's kind of been on a steady decline. And, nice to see him kind of have a bit of a bounce back at the beginning of this year, when the Seattle had those, injuries to Grubauer, and, Drieger is still injured as far as I know. So nice for him to kind of pick things up a little bit, but yeah, he's not really the goalie in Seattle that you want. But Jacob, why don't you tell us about your next cold goalie?
Second one is St. Louis Blues goaltender Jordan Binnington. And it's a shame because he has those moments where he just flashes brilliance. But as far as consistency across the board, that's just not the type of goaltender that he's been over the past couple of years. He's been on a steady decline. And as far as recently, he finally snapped a 4-game losing streak. That was on February 11th versus Arizona. He's been struggling to keep the puck out of the net in general. He's been scored on 4 or more times, 6 times since the new year started. And that's too many times for somebody who's supposed to be your starting goaltender. His overall play is shaky. He doesn't get the type of assistance defensively that he should, and the Blues just aren't playing super well. So overall, he's a goaltender that I would sit. I wouldn't say he's worth dropping because he still does get those starting minutes and he still does have the potential to win some games. He has a fairly even record. So whether you play a categories league and wins matter more, or you're playing a points league where maybe saves matter more, he's kind of up in the air, but right now he's a sit versus start option for me.
Absolutely. And I mean, like Binnington, there's kind of some question marks that maybe not quite question marks, but some character things that aren't great about him, and things that he does that just make you kind of shake your head, that are kind of extracurriculars. They're not related to his play, like his on ice play really at all. But he's definitely a guy that if St. Louis isn't doing well, I would steer clear from him 100%. And that's just kind of Binnington for you. Some breakout prospect candidates of goalies who kind of coming into their own, or they've been kind of on the bubble of NHL for a while. First goalie we're going to talk about is one of Carolina's three-headed monster, Peter Kochetkov. I think that's how you say his first name, Pyotr.
Yeah, it's Peter Kochetkov.
Kochetkov. There we go. So he's a 6'2", 179-pound goalie. According to Elite Prospects on Dauber, it says that he's 6'3" and 205 pounds. I don't know which it is. He's a 2019 second-round pick. His AHL and NHL stats for this season are kind of interesting. In the AHL, 12 games played, 2.49 goals against, 915 save percentage, 1 shutout, 7-4-1. And then in the NHL, 19 games played, he's got 2.33 goals against average, a 913 save percentage, 3 shutouts, and a record of 10-4-5. So he's been solid wherever he's played this year. And in his NHL games, in those 19 games played, 10 of those starts have been quality starts. So he's already at a level where he could be a full-time backup this year. Pardon me. He's got only 3 really bad starts. And this guy, I would be running to grab this goalie right now. Carolina's other 2 goalies, Ranta and Anderson, are made of glass. You look at them the wrong way and they get injured. This is the goalie you want to make sure, especially in Dynasty, that you have some goalie on this team, because this team does protect their goalies. Their goalies generally get good rate stats to help you win in category leagues. They generally don't allow a lot of goals because of how the defense plays in Carolina. That also helps you in your points leagues. So this guy seems like a no-brainer to pick up. What do you think, Jacob?
Yeah, Carolina has just been a good team for a while now. And while Freddie Anderson is still I would say, undisputed starter of that team, you're absolutely right. Him and Ranta are both just, it's glass bones. You never know if the wind blows in the wrong direction and suddenly it's a lower body injury and they're out for 6 weeks. But that is going to make Chekhov have that opportunity to step up, get those starts. And he's, like we kind of talked about earlier, goalies of the future. He is the goalie of the future for Carolina. And when Freddie Anderson's contract either expires or if he ends up with a career-ending or a season-ending injury, this is really where you're going to end up getting your value out of Kochetkov, because he has just a great team in front of him to support his already just solid overall goaltending mechanics. He's not a super lights out, elite, big saves all the time goaltender, but he's solid. He's consistent. He's just a very good starting potential goaltender. And he's the kind of goalie that you love in every kind of league that you have, because he will get you wins, he will get you saves, and he will keep his numbers low. And that's the best part about a goalie like that.
100%. And, just to quickly run through the last goalie that we got for you this week, Sam Ersson. I believe that's how you pronounce it. Swedish goalie, he's in the Flyers system. He's a 6'2", 176-pound goalie who's a 5th-round pick in 2018. 25 games played in the AHL so far this year, 2.68 goals against average, 910 save percentage, a record of 14-10-1, no shutouts. He's also seen some time in the NHL this year. He's seen 7 games with a 2.37 goals against average, a 918 save percentage, 1 shutout, and a record of 5-0-0. Pretty solid so far. Those are some promising early numbers. In those 7 games played, 4 of those games have been quality starts. 2 have been really bad starts. So that's not a bad, given the sample size, it's still pretty promising. Tortorella, if he's going to stay in Philly for the entirety of his contract, which is completely up in the air because Philadelphia does weird things. He does also coach, goalie friendly style. Carter Hart has seen a bit of an uptick, a bit of a resurgence this year. So Ersson is definitely somebody to consider adding in your dynasty leagues, which leads us to the topic of the week and the question that we're going to briefly touch on. What do you do about goalies in fantasy? There's several different strategies. Jacob, why don't you run us through a couple of your favorite strategies and how to deal with goalies in fantasy?
Yeah, goalies are always a tough thing to deal with, because whether you have a redraft league where everything gets shifted around, your position in that draft really determines what your quality of goaltending is going to be. If you have those early picks and you have a league that actually places value on wins, saves, shutouts, or anything in the goalie categories heavily, that's where you're really going to find your value in picking up an elite caliber goaltender early on. Somebody like Vasilevsky, Shesterkin, Sorokin, or even somebody a little bit more towards the mid-tier that just plays for a good team, somebody like Freddie Anderson. You have so many different options early on, but you have to be careful with using high picks on goaltenders, depending on how your league is formatted. You can always find good goaltenders midway through your draft or even late in your draft. It depends really how everything is formatted. The way that my keeper league runs, we place a lot of value on saves and wins. Mm-hmm. So goaltenders that play for teams that are good defensively and get a good amount of wins, those are the ones that you want to end up picking up. Mm-hmm. And that's why I ended up having good success with somebody like Vitek Vanacek. He gets a good amount of wins, and the Devils only give up a fair amount of shots. They're not overworking him every night, so he still has a good save percentage, and he's still getting a good amount of saves each night. Or I have a higher end goaltender in Shesterkin, so I already have that elite goaltender that's going to get me wins and get me saves each night. So I have that little bit of a balance on my own team. But if you have a deeper league, don't be afraid to use picks on these backup goaltenders or on these younger goaltenders. Somebody like Chekhov really does give a lot of value towards your fantasy roster, especially when it comes to saves and wins, because he's a prospect. He's going to get called up and play for a good team.
Yeah, and just like on the topic of saves and wins, in my big dynasty league that I love, those are the only 2 stats that we have for goalies, in this category league. We have 4 skater categories, but the wins and the saves, my strategy, because it has been difficult for me to get goalies that are the Vasilevskys, the Hellebucks, the Andersons. So I have sort of opted more so to lean into the save aspect. So my current tandem is Ville Husso, and I'm going to completely butcher this name, but Vejmelka. Ramelka,
Yep.
the Arizona starting goalie. They're always going to put up a lot of saves. So if I can just get a lot of saves, because they're going to get saves because they're going to get a lot of shots against them, right? And because they are at least average goaltenders, they're not terrible. They're not Martin Jones. They're not Jordan Binnington. They do get a decent amount of saves. And so those saves do pump up that category for me every week. And I think across the entire season in my league, I'm like second or third in saves across the entire season so far. So that has kind of worked out for me. The wins aspect, like if you can get Vasilevsky or whoever the healthy starting goaltender for Toronto is, Boston this year. If you
Jake Ottinger's another big one. Dallas has been good.
Yeah, Ottinger as well. So there are those goalies that are getting lots of wins because they're playing for good teams. You know, generally, if you can get a starting goalie for Colorado, like those teams that are always making the playoffs because of how many wins they generate, those are generally goalies you want. If you can get the starting goalie, awesome. If you just have to settle for a backup and then you get like a starting goalie for like a different team, like if you can get Saros always does well. Even if Nashville isn't doing well, he's always putting up saves. He always has good rate stats. He saves. He is a good goalie. He, over his career, he saves more goals than is expected of him. So that's always bonus. Sorokin is also kind of in that same tier of just really good goalies that don't always play for an awesome team. You know, Islanders are having a bit of a bounce back season. So that's definitely a viable strategy. In my dynasty league, there is one GM who his strategy is just to have, we play in a cap league. So he just wants, he doesn't want to spend a lot of money on goalies because it can be such a volatile position. Once you start getting past the top 10, 12 goalies, it's kind of a mixed bag, kind of all over the place. So he just chooses to not spend a lot of money and then to use the rest of his cap space on the very valuable defenseman that he needs to get his category coverage and, you know, top end forwards to help him get points and shots and hits. So that is also another strategy to consider if you are in a cap, either, you know, custom salary cap or NHL salary cap dynasty league.
Yeah, I want to just like pause and go back to one of the players that you mentioned before I kind of talk about my next point. You brought up Vejmelka. I love him as a goaltender, just in fantasy and in general. He is supremely underrated, and he gets not nearly as much attention as he deserves just because he plays for Arizona.
Yeah.
This guy is a lights out goaltender, and he deserves so much more credit than he is getting for what he does night in and night out for that team. So as Arizona continues to rise, as their prospects develop, and as they turn into a better team, he is going to be an absolute steal if you continue to hold on to him in much deeper dynasty style leagues. He is going to be one of your most valuable assets. You mark my words. You can quote me on it if you want. But I think he is just one of the most underrated goaltenders in the league right now. And just pay attention to what he does, because he's worth grabbing and he's worth holding on to if you have those much deeper leagues. Now, going into my next point, kind of as a strategy, a rule of thumb I like to have when picking up goaltenders or trading for goaltenders or even drafting them sometimes is, if they're on a good team, they're worth getting. Whether it's a backup, whether it's a starter, whether it's a mid-tier, whether it's a prospect call-up, it doesn't matter. things change throughout the years, and goaltending is always shuffling. It's always shifting. There's always the goalie re-roll at the start of every season. There's ones that just get moved to different teams for the sake of a change of scenery, and you see the results of it in some place like Toronto. They ended up switching their goaltending from Campbell to Matt Murray and Ilya Samsonov. Both Samsonov and Murray have really good numbers in Toronto. They're both starting caliber goaltenders, and they're basically being played like a tandem, or Murray keeps getting hurt because he's also made of glass bones. So Samsonov's getting all those opportunities to play and be a starting goaltender, and he's producing better than he was in Washington, where he was last year. Not to say Washington was a bad team last year, but they don't play the same style as Toronto does. And now Samsonov is reaping the benefits of that, and he's looking like a much better goaltender for it. So he's a cheap option that you could have picked up or grabbed or drafted late, and he's somebody that will have provided so much more value for you down the road, and he still has time left in Toronto to provide you even more value in the years to come. So a general rule of thumb I do like to follow is, if you're on a good team, you should pick up that goaltender. If you're on a rising team, pick them up late, and then you can be confident that the next season they're going to give you those good numbers, as that team is going to be good.
Yeah, totally. And just before we close out the show here, just to go back to Vejmelka, this guy, remember, he plays on Arizona. He has his goals saved above expected is positive 12.05 over the season. To have a positive goals saved above expected while playing for one of the bottom 5 teams in the league is phenomenal. This guy is going to be their goalie for years and years to come. They're going to get a top 5 pick this year. He's going to boost them up. This Arizona, they are doing bad now, but in dynasty leagues, if you can get the top performers that are performing there right now, that are on the rise, it's going to pay dividends in your dynasty league. That's all the time that we have for today. Next week, we will be discussing the topic of drafting goalies and entry drafts for dynasty leagues. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at THW Fantasy. I'm on Twitter at Caleb Scouting.
And I'm also on Twitter at Strozyk67.
If you are watching on YouTube, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the Hockey Writers YouTube channel. If you are listening in podcast format, subscribe to the podcast, and please leave us a review on whatever platform you listen to. You've been listening to the Hockey Writers Fantasy Forecheck. Keep your stick on the ice, get pucks in deep, and give it 110%, eh? I'll see you next week.